was on the chat group.
And Anna, I have no quarrels with that at all. My point simply is, this guy understands what happens when you go to war. He's been to war. He's seen people die. And again, I would have phrased it differently. Sure, we can have that argument.
He was reading from prepared remarks.
But to make the case that he doesn't care that soldiers lost their lives, I find that hard as hell to believe.
I did not say he didn't care. I said that the way he phrased it, as tragic things happened, was a very unfortunate way to discuss the loss
I'll take that.
lives.
I'll take unfortunate.
I don't know the critique of his service. It was actually a critique of what he, in fact, said.
In today's video, Abby Phillip and Anna Navarro corners Shermichael Singleton on Newsnight, with Abby Phillip as a heated debate erupts over the escalating US conflict with Iran and the Trump administration's aggressive war rhetoric. Tensions rise as Abby Phillip and Anna Navarro press Shermichael Singleton on the administration's messaging and the risks of escalating military action. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip and Anna Navarro shut down Shermichael Singleton on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
It does seem like the political leadership of the country, Pete Hegseth, the president, to Brett's point, they are all over the place in terms of what they're saying about this conflict. And I think the biggest question that we're all facing is that a sign of something that is unsettled, undecided beneath the surface, or is it just a lack of discipline?
Well, it's not just about this conflict. They've shown this behavior on a number of other issues, domestic as well as international. So you have to say that it is systemic, and it is a sign of a problem that runs deeper than just the messaging on this conflict. The messaging has been all over the place. Messaging was all over the place over Greenland. The messaging, on a lot of foreign policy issues, different people in the administration give different explanations for decisions that are made. So if you take that into consideration, then it's hard to say, well, they're deliberately doing this in order to keep the enemy guessing. I've heard that explanation used, that this is all part of a sort of deliberate strategy. You don't want the Iranians to know exactly what's coming next, and that's why you offer different messages. That would make sense if there was message discipline in other areas, and this was the one area where they were doing this. Here there's a pattern, and the pattern is very clear. Different parts of the administration simply don't seem to be reading from the same page.
And maybe it all comes down to Trump's gut. Let's play what Caroline Leavitt said about why the president made the decision to go to war.
President Trump does not make these decisions in a vacuum. The president had a feeling, again, based on fact, that Iran was going to strike the United States, was going to strike our assets in the region, and he made a determination to launch Operation Epic Fury based on all of those reasons.
I do think, I have to add, Bobby, I do believe there is an element of deliberately trying to obfuscate and because Trump and the government is aware that adversaries listen to what we say in the U.S. government. They know that they listen very clearly, and that then they view whatever we say as predicting the next move or setting a certain red line. And I think that it doesn't work that well for democracies where we have freedom of the press and where we have a public that deserves to know. At the same time, while I do know that kind of communication works for an adversary, I do think it's important for Americans to understand why the U.S. whether it's this war or any war, why the U.S. goes to war, because you need them to understand that you don't want things to divide further. You need them to understand national security threats. You need them to understand the threats posed by a regime. And while you may not want to go out there and say, this is going to be the next move and this is exactly what we're doing next, you see now a cadre of political officials and many people across the nation even having banter that almost comes off as though it's pro-regime sometimes, as though they feel the regime is the victim. And this is a real risk for our national security in general. So I do believe there is a benefit to having mixed communications when it comes to an adversary listening. But as somebody for my own media brand where I like to educate Americans, I do think it's important to communicate to Americans broadly.
So when Caroline Leavitt says that he has a feeling based on fact, should the American people be privy to what facts underlie that feeling?
The real issue goes beyond simple messaging mistakes. In a foreign policy, consistency matters because allies, adversaries, and financial markets all react to signals coming from Washington. When multiple officials deliver different explanations for the same military action, it can create confusion not only for the public but also for partners who are trying to understand America's long-term strategy in a volatile region. There's also a historical reason analysts worry about unclear communication during wartime. Research from institutions like the Rand Corporation has shown that mixed messaging from political leaders can weaken deterrence rather than strengthen it. If adversaries believe decision-making is unpredictable or poorly coordinated, they may actually test boundaries more aggressively. In other words, inconsistency doesn't always create strategic ambiguity. It can sometimes project uncertainty about who is truly steering policy. Another important factor is the relationship between democratic governments and public accountability. In the United States, major military actions traditionally come with detailed explanations to Congress and the public because those decisions carry long-term consequences. Wars reshape budgets, foreign alliances, and military commitments for years. When explanations rely heavily on instincts or gut feelings, it naturally raises questions about what intelligence assessments or strategic planning actually supported the decision. Finally, there's the broader credibility issue. Over the past 2 decades, public trust around war justifications has already been strained by past conflicts where intelligence claims later proved inaccurate or exaggerated. That history makes transparency even more important today. If leaders want strong public backing for major military moves, clear evidence and consistent messaging tend to matter far more than rhetorical confidence alone.
Sure, you have to make your case. During the Obama administration, during Libya, the administration did not feel the need to get permission, if you want to put it that way, from Congress for those strikes. I think they actually put a 32-page document together listing all the legal reasons why the president wasn't mandated by the Constitution for those military airstrikes, and we had hundreds of them, maybe even thousands by some accounts. That said, the way I look at this, for 47 years, Iran has been the #1 state sponsor of terror. China is our greatest adversary. They're only getting stronger. They're putting a lot of money, beefing up their military technology, specifically hypersonics. They import about 13 to 14% of all crude oil from Iran, 1.38 million barrels pumped per day, 80% out of Iran going to China. And so if you want to make the case strategically speaking why this matters, one, we have interest in the region. Two, we want to make sure that China does not usurp the United States of America in terms of global dominance. That, to me, is a very solid argument about why we need to remove the regime.
I don't think anybody's debating that. I think the question is whether or not that argument could not have been taken to the American people, because as you point out, all of those things have been true for a very long time. So there's nothing about this moment, at least that we know of, that would say, okay, it has to be tomorrow, when in fact we know that Iran has been a menace for 47 years.
And
why not go to the American
people? It's incredible to me that we are, what, 4 or 5 days into this now, and there still hasn't been a formal address to the nation by the President of the United States. Look, I think Donald Trump, and to a certain extent Hegseth as well, I think their psyche changed as a result of Venezuela. They are emboldened. Donald Trump realized he's got the biggest, most powerful armed forces in the world, and he intends to use them whenever he wants and however he wants. He didn't have to get permission for Congress to do the Maduro operation, and so now he thinks he can replicate it elsewhere. Obviously, Iran and Venezuela are 2 completely different balls of wax. We are 2 completely different regimes with capacities. Venezuela did not have the capacity, Maduro did not have the capacity to inflict pain and war on America. Iran has much greater capacities. I think, you know what I think is tragic? That Pete Hegseth refers to the death of 6 Americans as tragic things happen, almost flippantly. And I think the bellicose and braggadocious narrative and rhetoric you're hearing from him, that's what happens when you pick an unqualified weekend Fox News host to be Secretary of Defense.
The bigger issue usually isn't just the politics of the moment, it's how leaders justify sending the country into conflict. Historically, when the United States moves toward military escalation, presidents tend to lay out a detailed case to the public and to Congress. That transparency matters because once military operations begin, the consequences can stretch for years across diplomacy, economics, and national security. Another important point here is public accountability. In democratic systems, major military decisions typically come with clear explanations backed by intelligence briefings and strategic goals. When those explanations feel incomplete or overly vague, it naturally raises questions about whether the public is getting the full picture. Analysts often point out that public trust in wartime leadership has been fragile ever since earlier conflicts where initial justifications later proved inaccurate or exaggerated. There's also the reality that war messaging shapes global reactions. Allies watch carefully to see whether American leadership appears measured and coordinated, while adversaries watch for signals of overconfidence or inconsistency. When rhetoric sounds overly triumphant or dismissive of potential costs, it can sometimes make situations more volatile rather than calming them. Military historians often note that conflicts rarely follow the confident predictions made in the early days. And that's why discussions like this matter. It's not about denying that adversarial regimes pose real challenges. Most policymakers agree they do. The real concern is whether the strategy behind the military action is clearly defined and responsibly communicated. Without that clarity, even justified security concerns can turn into prolonged conflicts that leave both the region and the United States dealing with consequences far longer than anyone initially expected.
And I'm old enough to remember, and so are we around this table, 2003, when George W. Bush stood in a U.S. aircraft carrier and declared mission accomplished. And it was years of more fighting that ensued, and that was very premature. So him beating his chest and talking about all of this feels like not the right thing at the right time, and his focus should be on the loss of life.
Can I just make one point of objection to what Anna just said? You know, in politics, sometimes we make flippant remarks. If we could go back and do it over, we would. Pete Hegseth has served this country honorably. Many of the generals and individuals who gave him a Bronze Star wrote admirably about his leadership position. So I don't think that this is someone who doesn't recognize the importance of war, the toll it takes on families, and that you might indeed pay the ultimate price. And so I think we shouldn't forget that. We may dislike him. You may not like the comment that he made, and we could critique maybe it wasn't the right way to word it.
I mean, she was
but this is someone who knows war more than anybody at this table that I'm familiar with, and we should keep that in mind.
Well, let me remind you that this is the same guy that was on a chat group revealing all sorts of information that should not have revealed in that chat group to all sorts of people that should not have had that information, including a journalist who he didn't even know was on the chat group.
And Anna, I have no quarrels with that at all. My point simply is, this guy understands what happens when you go to war. He's been to war. He's seen people die. And again, I would have phrased it differently. Sure, we can have that argument.
He was reading from prepared remarks.
But to make the case that he doesn't care that soldiers lost their lives, I find that hard as hell to believe.
I did not say he didn't care. I
said
that the way he phrased it, as tragic things happened, was a very unfortunate way to discuss the loss of 6 lives.
I'll take unfortunate.
I don't know the critique of his service. It was actually a critique of what he, in fact, said and how he placed the deaths of those service members in the context of President Trump and whether or not he's being treated fairly or unfairly by the press. It just was out of left field for most people who heard those remarks. But
the conversation quickly shifts from partisan talking points to a bigger issue: how leaders talk about war and sacrifice. Historically, Americans expect a certain level of seriousness and restraint when discussing military conflict, especially when lives are lost. That expectation exists because every military decision ultimately affects real service members and their families. One thing that often gets overlooked in these debates is how important tone and messaging are during wartime. Military historians frequently point out that overly triumphant or boastful language can backfire, especially early in a conflict. Leaders from both parties have learned that lesson the hard way. The early days of the Iraq War, for example, showed how confident declarations about quick victories can quickly collide with the unpredictable reality of prolonged fighting. Another factor here is the issue of accountability in national security leadership. Holding senior officials responsible for how they communicate isn't the same as questioning their service. In fact, many veterans themselves argue that military experience should come with an even greater awareness of the weight behind public statements about casualties and combat operations. Words matter because they shape how the public understands the risks and responsibilities tied to military action. That's why these debates resonate with so many viewers. The core concern isn't about scoring political points or dismissing someone's background. It's about making sure the people responsible for major national security decisions communicate with clarity, discipline, and respect for the gravity of war. When that standard slips even slightly, it raises broader questions about leadership and how seriously the costs of conflict are being treated. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.